Hello. Welcome again to this study of evidences for the historical reliability of the Bible. Although there are very many more evidences that we could look at, today is the last week in the quarter and the final week of our study. Last week we looked at references to biblical kings in the 9th century BC Mesha stele. Contrary to the contentions of skeptics, we saw evidence of the 10th century BC House of David in the 9th century BC Tel Dan stele, along with a probable reference to the same in the Mesha stele. We also saw last week what archaeologists believe are evidences of Israelite fortress cities from the 10th century BC at Khirbet Kiryafa and at Tel Etan. This would be at the time of the united monarchy under Saul, David, and Solomon. We also saw a reference to the king at the Khirbet Kiryafa site. I would be remiss if I didn't also refer to an inscription at the Temple of Amun in Karnak, Egypt, known as the Shoshenq relief. On one of the walls of the temple, the 10th century BC Egyptian pharaoh Shoshenq I recorded his military exploits in the lands east of the Mediterranean Sea that included the areas of the Negev Desert and southern Judah. Shoshenq I is believed to be the biblical Shishak, king of Egypt, who is mentioned in the books of 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles. In the 12th chapter of 2 Chronicles, we read about Shishak's military campaign into the area. When the rule of Rehoboam was established and was strong, he forsook the law of the Lord, and all Israel with him. In the 5th year of King Rehoboam, because they had been unfaithful to the Lord, Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem with 1,200 chariots and 60,000 horsemen. And the people were without number who came with him from Egypt, Libyans, Sukkaim, and Ethiopians. And he took the fortified cities of Judah and came as far as Jerusalem. So Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem. He took away the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house. He took away everything. He also took away the shields of gold which Solomon had made. Among the cities and places listed on the Shoshenq relief on the wall of the Temple of Ammon is a place in the region of Judah now translated by prominent Egyptologist Kenneth Kitchen as the Heights of David. If this translation is correct, then we have a mention of David in an Egyptian transcription less than half a century after David's death. But what about immediately prior to the kingship of David? Are there any evidences supporting the biblical record from that time period? We have seen some interesting archaeological discoveries which bear on stories from that time period or earlier, such as the Balaam inscription and the Goliath shard. These were discoveries that date from the 9th or 10th century BC that refer back to stories from earlier times. But are there evidences that are dated themselves from the period of the Judges or even earlier that support the biblical record? In 1896, the archaeologist Flinders Petrie was doing work in the ancient Egyptian capital city of Thebes. While working at the funerary temple of the 13th century BC pharaoh Meneptah, he discovered a monument providing the records of some of the campaigns of Pharaoh Meneptah, primarily against the Libyans, but also referring to actions in Canaan. Including in the monument, known as Meneptah stele, is a reference to Israel. It says, Ashkelon has been overcome. Gezer has been captured. Yanoam was made non-existent. Israel is laid waste, and his seed is not. As with inscriptions recorded by other ancient monarchs, the information highlights or exaggerates the good and puts the best spin on the bad. It is doubted by many that Meneptah's forces ever entered Canaan. However, the mention of Israel in the inscription is historically significant. Some of the hieroglyphic notations on the monument are those used to describe cities. The hieroglyphs on the monument in the Israel reference are some that are typically used not so much for a city, but for a people who do not yet have a firmly established nation state. This would be consistent with the depiction of Israel in the Bible, as a people who were still in the process of becoming a kingdom. The picture that emerges is one of a people by the name of Israel that were present in the land of Canaan, but not yet firmly established as a nation state in the late 13th century BC. The parallel with the stories in the Bible are amazingly consistent. This Meneptah stele, also known as the Israel stele, contains the earliest generally accepted mention of Israel in the archaeological record. There's another that is not universally accepted, but which is very likely and which dates from even earlier. The Berlin pedestal relief has been sitting in the Berlin Museum for more than a century. The pedestal is believed to have originally been the base for a statue. One portion of the relief did not receive scholarly attention until 2001 and more recently in 2010. Three cartouches, that is, ovals with hieroglyphs inside, are present. These are referred to as name rings, with the first two containing the names Ashkelon, an ancient city, and Canaan, a region, both mentioned in the Bible. The third name ring is broken with the name only partially legible, but more than one scholar now believes that the complete name is that of Israel. The cartouche dates from perhaps as early as the mid-14th century BC. One last group of documents that I will mention are a group of clay tablets known as the Amarna letters. The Amarna letters are a group of almost 400 clay tablets written in the Akkadian language. They were found in Amarna, Egypt, beginning in the late 1800s. They are records of correspondence in the mid-14th century BC between Egyptian pharaohs and various representatives and governments in the Middle East. In the mid-14th century BC, Abdu-Heba, ruler of Jerusalem at that time, writes a letter to the Pharaoh of Egypt. Abdu-Heba speaks of invaders called the Haparu or Habaru. Habaru is a debated term. Alternate spellings found in the Amarna letters are Haparu and Aparu. Some believe that Abdu-Heba is referring to the Jebusites. The Jebusites were a Canaanite tribe that occupied Jerusalem prior to its conquest by the Hebrews. However, the term Habaru was also used to refer to the Hebrew people in some contexts. Notice the similarity also between the words Habaru and Hebrew. They are even more similar when you realize that the written Hebrew language didn't originally contain vowels, only consonants. The letter of Abdu-Heba was written to the Pharaoh of Egypt at the traditional time of the Hebrew conquest of Canaan. It reads as follows: To the king, my lord, thus speaks Abdu-Heba, your servant. At the feet of the king, my lord, 7 times and 7 times I prostrate myself. While the king, my lord, lives, I will say to the commissioner of the king, my lord, why do you favor the Haparu and are opposed to the rulers? And thus I am accused before the king, my lord, because it is said, lost are the territories of the king, my lord. I repeat, allow me to enter the presence of the king, my lord, and let me look into both eyes of the king, my lord. But the hostility against me is strong, and I cannot enter the presence of the king, my lord. May the king send garrison troops, in order that I may enter and look into the eyes of the king, my lord. So certain as the king, my lord, lives, when the commissioners come, I will say, lost are the territories of the king. Do you not hear to me? All the rulers are lost. The king, my lord, does not have a single ruler left. May the king direct his attention to the archers, and may the king, my lord, send troops of archers. The king has no more lands. The Haparu sacked the territories of the king. If there are archers here this year, all the territories of the king will remain intact. But if there are no archers, the territories of the king, my lord, will be lost. To the king, my lord, thus writes Abdu-Heba, your servant. He conveys eloquent words to the king, my lord. All the territories of the king, my lord, are lost. Among the Amarna letters, there are various cries for help from various places that are in danger from the Habaru. For example, Milkalu, the ruler of Gezer, writes to Pharaoh for help. May the king, my lord, know that the war against me and against Suardata is severe. So may the king, my lord, save his land from the power of the Aparu. Aparu and Haparu are both variant spellings of the term Habaru. There are numerous other mentions of the Habaru in the Amarna letters. Abdu-Heba, in another letter to Pharaoh, warns the Pharaoh that another local ruler by the name of Labayu had already given over some of his lands to the Habaru. Labayu was ruler of the land around Shechem, which was an early center of power for the Israelite people in the conquest of Canaan. Shechem was one of the places designated as a city of refuge by the Hebrews. It was the place where Joshua, near the end of his life, summoned the leaders of all the tribes to meet him and establish a covenant to serve God and to put away the foreign gods from their midst. Shechem was the place where the bones of Joseph, which had been carried from Egypt, were buried. Labayu, in a letter himself to Pharaoh, admits that he did not know that his son was consorting with the Habaru, But when he did find out, he turned his son over to a representative of Pharaoh. So, in a mid 14th century BC letter from Jerusalem to the Pharaoh of Egypt, the ruler of Jerusalem writes that the invading Habaru are conquering the land of Canaan. At the same time, the ruler of Gezer and rulers from various other cities were also appealing to Pharaoh to save them from the power of the Habaru. Among the cities that had already fallen to the Habaru were Shechem, which is mentioned several times as an early part of the conquest of Canaan by the Israelites. Although perhaps not quite the airtight evidence that we have seen in previous weeks, I thought that it was an extremely interesting and compelling parallel to the story in the biblical record. There are many other evidences that we could examine, but this is the last week in this quarter and in this study. I hope that it's been helpful to you. From the Nabonidus Cylinder and the Nabonidus Chronicle unveiling the figure of Belshazzar, previously known only from the book of Daniel, to the prism of Sennacherib's mention of Hezekiah and his city of Jerusalem remaining unconquered, to the elephantine papyri and their confirmation of the Jewish high priest and of Sanballat the Samaritan, both named in the book of Nehemiah, to clay seals of various biblical figures, to the actual ration tablets of King Jehoiakim in Babylonian captivity, to the priestly blessing from Numbers chapter 6 found in the Ketef Enam silver scrolls, to the Balaam inscription found on a collapsed Ammonite wall, to the actual picture of King Jehu of Israel on the 9th century BC black obelisk of Shalmaneser. From these and many, many, many others, we have confirmations of the historical reliability of the Bible. It can be trusted, not just in historical matters, but especially in how to live our lives. Let it be a lamp unto your feet and a light unto your path. Thanks for listening. May the Lord bless you and keep you.